the first thing that I want to do is acknowledge you for being a helper. So I understand fully, because I am one, that your intentions are to do good, that you want to help people. What could possibly be wrong with that? People who are helpers tend to overdo it sometimes. We tend to become unbalanced. And in some ways, we even tend to cause harm unintentionally. And so I'm going to go over some of the negative side effects to being a helper, to saying yes when we don't necessarily mean it or when we shouldn't. So here's what it looks like. You might be doing a good thing out of the kindness of your heart and not realizing that there might be negative consequences. So for example, when you are doing something for someone else, and this is usually when you're doing something for someone else that they're asking you or they're needing you or you think that they need you, and it doesn't necessarily feel right. It may not be something that you really want, but you're like, well, I really want to help them, and you're doing it anyway. Well, a lot of times what happens when you are doing that is you might be helping one person and then taking away from someone else. You might be contributing in one way, but then something else in your life is lacking. And so this can exist, even just within your friends or family. So the biggest source of these yeses that you shouldn't be saying often is when you are doing something for family or friends. That would make a lot of sense. I mean, these are people who are close to you. You love them. You want to help them. And so when they ask you for something, or sometimes they don't even have to ask, you just try to help them. Well, the problem is that just a simple example is that someone says, hey, can you help me move? And then because you're the helping type, you say, sure. But what you had forgotten is that you had made plans with someone else. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe you're supposed to, be somewhere with your kids or whatever the case may be. And by committing to doing something for someone else, you're taking away from another person that you care about. Now, it's not just about the other people in your life. Also, what happens is you take away from other aspects of your life. And so while you may be invested in your friend's relationship and constantly being on the phone with them, trying to coach them through it and feeling like you're supporting them and being the, shoulder for them to lean on, all that time could have been spent, working on filling out applications for the new job that you want. It could have been, enrolling in school. It could have been reading a book. It could have been learning something that is going to help your life. It could be doing something that feeds you instead of being on the phone with someone that drains you. And so the whole purpose of this course is to help you differentiate those times where you're truly helping and the times where you're not necessarily making the impact that you want to. And so one of those impacts you don't want is to be having one aspect of your life suffering because of the fact that you are saying yes and helping in another way. And so that can be negative side effects. So another way that you can actually cause harm by being a helper or by saying yes when it's really not a yes that you mean is that when you are sacrificing, which often happens when you're saying yes when you shouldn't be or when you're helping, by sacrificing, a lot of times you actually are harming the other party by making them feel guilty. And you probably have no idea that this happens, but if you give of yourself and you sacrifice something that someone else knows matters to you, and they're the receiver of whatever it is that you're giving, they also realize a lot of times that they're taking from you and you're allowing them to do it. And even though they might not say it or even admit it, a lot of them can tell. They feel it, they know it, and they feel bad about it. And so here you are trying to help them, but what you're actually doing is making them feel guilty. And this especially happens when you sacrifice yourself without them even asking. It's like, I'm going to go without so that you can have, which it sounds very nice. And I'm not trying to say that you don't have your heart in the right place. I just think a lot of times people like us, we don't realize that we can actually be burdening the other person by giving too much. And so here's an example. If you think about children, that a lot of people, most people want their children to grow up to be happy and successful and to go for their dreams. And a lot of times we want our kids to go for their dreams because we didn't go for ours. So it's like we're going to give them everything we have. We're going to sacrifice for them. We're going to make sure that they're not wanting for anything, even if it means we have to go without. And we're going to put all of our time into them. And if it means that we don't have time for ourselves, that's okay, because our job as a parent is the most important job in the world, and on and on and on. And again, it sounds really good. But the problem with it is that on one hand, just like I mentioned, that if the child ever can see, whether as a child or an adult, that you are actually going without, harming yourself, sacrificing, and being unhappy in some way because of what you're doing for them, they will feel guilty. You are instilling guilt in your child. They're going to be less guilty if they see you being balanced and happy and healthy as well as them. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is that children learn more than any other way through modeling. So here you are with this vision of your child happy and healthy and successful and living their dream. And what's going to happen, because they're watching you, is that they're going to grow up to be a self-sacrificer that doesn't go for their dreams and doesn't end up being happy and successful, because they're going to be doing the same thing you're doing for them, for their children. And so I know that that sounds a little bit harsh, but it is absolutely true. I see it all the time. And so the best thing you can do for your child is to model a way of living happy and healthy and successful and following your dreams, because they're going to model you, especially if then you're going and sacrificing for them and then they feel guilty. So they're going to grow up to feel like guilty adults that have to sacrifice in order to repent for their guilt. So it can actually go very, very bad for people who are way over the top with their self-sacrificing. So another way that this sacrificing leading to guilt can come up is with money. So a lot of times, that's why they say, never to lend money to people. The reason why is because a lot of people have learned the lesson. What happens is that on one hand, you create a dependency. So that's at a practical level, not good. But another thing is that some people, they might come to you out of desperation. They feel like they really need it. Don't have their head on straight. They don't know what to do with their lives, whatever the case may be. They need money. You give them money. You give them support in that way. And some of the people, even though they feel like they need it, and in some ways, oh, you should give it to me, they feel guilty about it. They feel bad about themselves. They feel bad that they're taking from you. Even the ones that seem like they have no remorse, sometimes they really do. They feel terrible. So you might feel like you're giving to them, but what you're also giving them is a really big, blob of guilt that's going to weigh heavy on them. And then there's the other people that they'll just take and take and take, and they don't feel guilty at all. And that's even worse, because then they have this sense of entitlement and they're completely detached from their own responsibility for the life. And the problem is that you're enabling them. And so that's the third way that you can cause harm. Enabling someone to continue to not take responsibility for their life is not helping. It is harmful to them. And I have seen this so many times. Family members, friends, clients, it's rampant. And part of the reason why we have this whole generation of kids that everybody likes to make fun of, the saying, oh, they feel like they're entitled. Well, the reason why they're entitled is because they have people in their lives, usually their parents, that are doing everything for them. They're being enabled to not take responsibility for their lives. And so what other choice do you have? Well, you can empower someone instead of enabling them. It's just like the cliche about, rather than giving a man fish, you teach them how to fish, and then they can fend for themselves and find their own fish. Otherwise, you have to just keep coughing out the fish. It's not a practical long-term strategy. And I understand it is very hard to get out of a pattern like that. And it's very common, it's very normal, but it's not working. And so that's what this course is about, is to help give you ideas for ways to do things differently and why you would want to. And the greatest example of that, it really can go much better if you empower someone versus enabling them, is the example of adult children. There are a lot of adult children that are still dependent on their parents, and their parents are constantly having to save them and bail them out of things, whether it's bailing them out financially or out of jail, and like taking care of their kids, sometimes adopting their kids. And I can understand with grandchildren, it's a little bit more challenging to try to put your foot down, because you're afraid of what's going to happen if you don't come in and save them. But what happens every single time is when a parent draws the boundary, and in extreme situations, kicks the kid out, cuts them off, stops saving them. And in order to do that, they have to actively take time and focus and go and do their own thing to distract them from the needy child. But when they actually do it and they follow through and they stop playing that role with their child, it is amazing. All of a sudden, they become adults and they take care of themselves and they survive. They don't die. They don't end up in a ditch. They don't end up in prison. They actually step up to the plate because they have to, because they're no longer being enabled. So again, it sounds a little bit harsh, but this is why we're all in this course, isn't it? To learn how to say no. And that is a really big one. And so another way that you cause harm is to yourself. And it also spills over into other people, and that is through resentment. Because if you are saying yes when you don't mean it, if you are helping when you're really not feeling like you should, if you're feeling taken advantage of, if you're going against what you really believe, if, saying yes when you don't mean it, it causes you to resent the people that you're doing it for. And so it's even worse when you end up feeling that resentment for your own children. And so if you're feeling resentment for the people in your life in one way or another, then that's a really big sign that this is something that you really need to take care of, in which case you're in the right place by taking this course. So what happens when you're resentful, there's two different things that happen. One is that it actually harms your relationships. It causes damage because there's an imbalance and you're feeling taken advantage of, you're feeling trapped, and that causes conflict and it causes strain in a relationship. It doesn't matter who it is, whether it's a child, a spouse, a partner, another relative, a friend, people at work, your boss, whatever the case may be, it's going to be an unhealthy relationship. And then the worst thing that happens is that you actually become unhealthy yourself. It starts to eat you up from within. And there's two of my favorite quotes that I really think capture this. And so I want to leave you with those. And one is that obligation breeds contempt. And so you're resentful because you're doing things out of obligation. You are feeling contempt for the thing that you feel obligated to. And that is a really big reason why a lot of people do the things they do when they're trying to be helpful. Again, it's coming from a good place, but by acknowledging the negative consequences of it, we can take control back of our lives and to be able to help in a much healthier way. And my last and favorite quote is that resentment or harboring contempt and doing things that you know you shouldn't be doing, saying yes when you don't really mean it, helping in a way that isn't helping, all of those things are like taking poison and expecting someone else to die. So again, harboring resentment is like taking poison and expecting someone else to die. So what that means is that you're doing these things that at your core you feel like you shouldn't be doing. You're helping, you're not being appreciated, you develop resentment. And resentment is like a feeling that we hold almost like we're trying to punish the other person. So even though we're trying to help them, we're trying to punish them by feeling resentment for them. Does this make sense to you? So I know you've probably felt that. I know I've experienced it myself. So on one hand, you're helping. On another hand, you're kind of bitter about it. And that bitterness, that feeling, those times when you're a little bit snooty towards them, those times when you're, standoffish, it kind of goes one extreme to the other. You're doing it in a part because you're holding it against them. You're trying to harm them. But what happens is you're harming yourself. You're poisoning yourself. And so just think about that. If you have these feelings, if you've had these experiences, then stick with it, go through the rest of this course, and know that there is a better way and that you absolutely can stop the patterns and that you can say yes in a way that you really mean it and you can say no in a way that honors you. So thank you.